directly with today's topic. So I'm going to begin at the beginning with a verse from Genesis chapter 2. Then the Lord God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living being. And we know this first man as Adam, from the Hebrew word Adamah, which means earth or dust. And the Latin word for earth is humus, which is the root of the word human. So the very word to describe us reminds us that we come from earth and are related to earth, as well as to the living breath of God, who has created us and breathed life into the dust. And science now, in fact, tells us that all matter is formed of the same elements. Earth is of stardust, and we are indeed one with the remainder of the cosmos, or as Christians would say, one with God's creation, which is interconnected and interdependent. Related words are humility, humble, humane, and they too remind us that we are connected to earth, who we are and where we come from, and to whom we belong. And Christians confess that we belong to God, the creator of all. And according to the book of Genesis, God has given us human creatures the vocation and the responsibility of caring for everything God has created. And so we are here tonight as those who are trying to live up to that vocation. On Ash Wednesday, some of us here may have heard the words spoken, "Remember you are dust, and to dust you shall return." The committal prayers of Christians includes the words, "We commit his or her body to the ground, earth to earth, ashes to ashes, dust to dust." So at the end of life, we are reminded where we have come from and what we are made of, and what will happen to the form of our body as it decomposes in the ground and becomes one with the earth again. And as for all living creatures, each human life comes to an end in one way or another. We will die. We don't often want to think about our mortality, but today's topic confronts us with that, and at the same time with our desire to care for God's creation. Here are some verses from Psalm 90. God, you have been our refuge from generation to generation. Before the mountains were brought forth, or the land and the earth were born, from age to age, you are God. You turn us back to the dust and say, "Go back, O child of earth." You sweep us away like a dream. We fade away suddenly like the grass. Satisfy us by your loving kindness in the morning. So shall we rejoice and be glad all the days of our life. May the graciousness of our God be upon us. Prosper the work of our hands, prosper our handiwork. And close with a prayer. Creator God, we thank you for creating us as human beings, for life on this beautiful planet in this complex universe. Help us to live with joy and love as those prepared to die, facing our mortality with peace and hope. Open us to your truths and wisdom, for you are the mystery of life and love at the heart of the universe. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Margaret. I'll pass it to Marion to pass it on to Ray and Louisa.
Okay. I'm just going to go back to gallery view so I could find Ray and find Louisa. And so the two of you, Ray and Louisa, as you know, are going to talk to us about green burial this evening and all the things that come with it. They come with some pretty incredible ideas and have some invaluable information to share with us. And so I'm going to put it, well, I'm going to put it on speaker view so that you can be seen as much as possible. I'm also, but you also should be able to screen share. And both of you know how to do, oh, there we go. Okay, there. So I'll just let you do that. And so take it away.
Thank you, Marion, and thank you, Margaret, for a beautiful reflection there. That really sets the scene. That's great. And so we're delighted to have this opportunity to tell you more about the exciting possibilities for green burial in Canada and in our diocese. In fact, tonight you're going to get a BOGO. You're going to get 2 messages for the price of 1. As friends of the environment, you will learn more about how green burial offers you a way to truly carry your living values into your end-of-life choices. But secondly, as people of faith, we hope to open up your thinking on the opportunities green burial might offer your parishes for repurposing church buildings and land. I'm Ray Mattolie from the Anglican parish of French Village with our 4 lovely churches beside beautiful St. Margaret's Bay. And I'm joined tonight by Louisa Horne. We are both passionate about the concept of green burial and have been working together on an exciting church project, which we will tell you about later. Our presentation is going to take 20 minutes or so there'll be plenty of time for discussion afterwards. I suggest we save actual questions until the end, but feel free to put things on the chat line in the meantime. So I'm going to hand over to Louisa to get us rolling.
Okay, I'll just do a quick sound check. Ray, can you give me a thumbs up if the audio is okay? Okay, that's all I needed to know. So as Ray said, yes, BOGO. I hadn't thought of that. I thought maybe he was going to say he was getting 2 of us as opposed to 1. But yes, we've got a couple of different messages, and we're pretty excited about some of the work we've been involved in. And you see from the bios that you had of some of the projects that both of us have had some connection to give us the background. And green burial is certainly something that has been around, obviously, a very long time. It's a worldwide tradition that we in North America have moved away from over the last decades, and even though in many faiths it's still very much the way that things are done. And so we're seeing a lot of activity in some parts of the world, certainly in the US, certainly more in Canada now. It's been very popular in the UK for some time, and we're seeing this increased interest in this alternative way to consider how we will end our lives in terms of going back to nature and being good stewards of the earth. So you'll see some photographs throughout. Most of the slides have some images just to help you get a picture of what this looks like. And of course, they're very beautiful pictures in many cases. And green burial can be a very sacred and wonderful experience for people. And we have 5 principles of green burial that have actually been defined by a couple of different organizations that you'll hear about tonight. And I'm going to quickly go through those 5 principles just to give you a sense of what we mean when we talk about green burial. So the first one is that to be green, there can be no embalming. Embalming obviously is a very common practice, or has been in the last century or so, that grew out of a need to be able to preserve bodies after wartime in the US, in fact, is where it started when they wanted to be able to ship soldiers across the country. And so this chemical way of slowing decomposition was figured out using formaldehyde. It's not something that's required. Many people feel it's a required thing, but it's certainly not. And there are other ways to preserve bodies that are more environmentally sensitive and that don't end up putting toxins in the ground or exposing the people who are doing the body care to significant toxins as well. Second principle that's an absolute requirement in terms of a burial being considered truly green is that the remains, the unembalmed remains, are not in a container that's not going to be able to decompose as it should. So you'll see here some images of the kinds of containers that are generally used. They can be wicker, they can be made out of various types of fabric. Shrouds are common in some faith communities. Certainly different types of boxes made of wood or cardboard or other material, often that are decorated by the family. In fact, we have a wonderful craftsman from New Brunswick who builds kits that people buy, and they can be a bookcase before you need it, and people can decorate it and do all sorts of wonderful things to it first. So there's no vault, no liner, and in green burial, the depth, which some people think sounds like not a lot, and in fact it isn't, it doesn't need to be, is about 1.2 meters of depth. So that's an absolute in terms of a principle of green burial. Third one, there's generally attention given, of course, to ecological restoration and conservation. So the pictures that you're seeing here, of course, are of conservation sites, and you'll hear more a little bit later from Ray about the different types of green burial locations. Some cemeteries are like this, with a full conservation kind of focus that have that protective easement on them to ensure that they have that perpetual care and protection of the ecosystems. So there can be restoration there and certainly conservation. Even within existing cemeteries that may not be designated as a conservation site, there are certainly efforts made to be more ecologically sensitive in the work that they do. The fourth one is around how the memorialization is done. So you would be seeing in these photographs that there aren't the usual rows and rows of headstones that are typical in our traditional cemeteries, but rather the whole burial site is seen as a living memorial to those who are buried there, and a more natural use, a much more minimally intrusive kind of approach to memorializing is common. So it may be something that's engraved in a large natural looking stone for a large group of people. It could be something that's made sort of as a carving, but various types of naturally sourced materials would typically be used, and you wouldn't see those rows of headstones. It's more of a simple fitting into the natural environment type of memorialization that you would see in a true green burial site. And the final one is, of course, around the optimization of the land that's being used. So again, it can be a full green burial cemetery, or it can be a section of an existing cemetery. And the intention is that there can be multiple uses and optimized use. Now in North America, we don't have the opportunity to reuse grave space. That may come at some point, and it is possible in some parts of the world. But certainly there are other activities that can take place in a full conservation space, and you'll hear some thoughts about that in a little bit. But certainly the intention is that the plant life and the ecology of the space is considered as a priority and part of what is put into the planning of a space that's going to be used for green burial. So those are the 5 principles that are characteristics of all green burial sites that have a designation as a green burial site. There are certainly lots of on the edge types of green burial that don't necessarily meet all of those principles. But when we talk about green burial as a certification that would come through a designating organization that you'll hear about, those are the 5 things that need to be included in the burial space. Now, just to speak a little bit again about conventional burial and the difference in the pictures that you've seen up until now versus what we would consider to be an environmentally not so friendly process of conventional burial. There's obviously a lot of equipment used. There are the cemeteries that have lots of fertilizer and lots of equipment used to keep them looking beautiful. There are the headstones. There's all the equipment and the work that is done to prepare bodies for conventional burial, most of which is most certainly not needed. And then, of course, there are the expensive caskets that you see in the bottom picture, many of which are made from wood that is transported from the other side of the world, some of which comes from rainforests. It could be endangered types of trees that are being used to create these fabulous pieces of work with lots of metal and brass and whatever kinds of decoration on top of them that make them even more environmentally unfriendly. And then in many cases, they're put inside a vault, which the purpose of which is to keep the grass from sinking. So lots of expense, lots of environmental challenges with what we typically do in traditional burial, conventional burial. Lots of environmental impact. I mentioned already the formaldehyde-based fluids that are going into the ground, and you'll see just some statistics here about the types of materials that are going into the ground, whether it's steel, concrete, tropical hardwoods, the carbon emissions from vehicles in the cemetery, from digging very deep holes and coming back with big machines to fill them back in, flowers from around the world. All of these things that have been part of our recently conventional burials would not be considered to be friendly to our environment at all. But then we've had a major move over the last number of years towards cremation, and you would see some statistics about the dramatic increase in the number of people who have chosen cremation as their option, and they're thinking they're being more environmentally friendly because they're not taking up as much space perhaps, and that the whole process is more environmentally friendly. Well, we're here to tell you that that's not exactly true, because if you think about the incredible energy that's required for the operation of the furnaces that are used in a typical crematorium, you'll see that the energy would be the equivalent of driving from Halifax to Sydney, Nova Scotia, that is, for those of you who might be thinking Australia, that would be really far. But Sydney, Nova Scotia and back would be the typical amount of energy that's required in that several hours at that kind of temperature that is required. And then of course there are gases and heavy metals that are emitted. There's a considerable amount of mercury in many cases and other things that are going out the smokestack of that crematorium on the bottom right. And you can see on the bottom left just the incredible, obviously, heat and energy required. So cremation is not a green option if people are thinking of it in that way, which many are. Green burial, on the other hand, we're reducing all of those energies. We're being very focused on the conservation and care for the resources that we're using. We're not doing irrigation to make sure that the green grass is perfect. We're not putting the fertilizers and having the machinery out there to maintain that. Instead, we are trying to preserve, to enhance, to remediate a natural environment. And in perfect alignment with what Margaret said in the opening, this is part of the comfort that many people feel in returning to nature and wanting that type of option for them where they are supporting land protection and restoration and management. So all of those things are part of ensuring a very positive carbon footprint, attention, and environmental impact. Whoops, too fast. Back to Ray.
Thank you, Louisa. Yeah, so the Green Burial Society of Canada is the leading body setting standards for green burial in this country. And it has designated 3 types of green burial cemeteries. Now, I should just add briefly that green burial can take place in cemeteries which aren't designated as green burial cemeteries, as long as whoever operates that cemetery permits it. So that could be in church graveyards as well. But to look at the 3 main types of green burial cemetery which meet the principles, the 5 principles that Louisa has just described to you. Firstly, there is firstly, the first 2 are mainly hybrids. In other words, they're existing cemeteries which have set aside a designated area to be a green burial for green burials. And these can be either small hybrids up to 1 acre or large hybrids 1 acre plus. And the criteria that the GBSC sets for their operation varies depending on their size. Now, we do have a hybrid cemetery here in Nova Scotia that has been certified, and that's Sunrise Interfaith Cemetery, and Hatchet Lake, just outside of Halifax, which is a beautiful location. So we have the small hybrids, we have the large hybrids, and then we have conservation. And these are standalone conservation easements with even more criteria. Now, it was a conservation cemetery that first introduced me to green burial. And that was back 20 years ago. I was living in London at the time, and a friend in our church chose green burial. It meant nothing to me at the time, but her burial, it was a beautiful service, and her burial ground was a lovely wooded park in the countryside outside of London, with walking trails leading through natural wildlife, trees, shrubs, and flowers. And there was occasional wooden benches which served as grave markers instead of permanent tombstones, which gave somewhat a place for people to rest as they enjoyed the surroundings and remembered their loved ones. And birds were encouraged by the feeders that others had chosen as grave markers. And her casket was charming, made of wicker, entwined with her favourite flowers for decoration, very much like the one that appeared in one of Louisa's slides. There are over 300 green burial cemeteries in the UK, and green burial represents more than 15% of all burials. In the USA, it's growing very fast. There are more than 135 green burial cemeteries, of which 10 are designated as conservation. So far, there are just 10 Green Burial Society of Canada certified cemeteries here. And there are only 2 Canadian conservation cemeteries, and both of them are on islands in BC. One is Salt Spring Island and the other is Denman Island. So that's beautiful, but not much use to us here in the Maritimes. So we want to share with you our excitement for the prospect of the first green burial cemetery here in Nova Scotia, and one that will be on church-owned land. We are calling our project French Village Woodland Conservation Area. Now, this Google map might mean something to some of you who know St Margaret's Bay, but the red spot is is where St Paul's Church is based. As you see, it's right by the bay. And the next slide will show us how that looks on the plot map. And you will see that leading back from the church,
Okay.
we have 27 acres of virtually untouched woodland. It stretches back for 2 kilometers. And as you see, it skirts a lovely freshwater lake, Brine Lake. Now, our original plan when we started looking at this about 5 years ago, and Mariam will remember that because she was very supportive at the time, was to explore the use of just part of this land for green burial. But we were so encouraged by expert views of the diversity of the flora and fauna that we're now looking to establish a conservation area with a number of activities to benefit the community, including a conservation green burial cemetery. And perhaps it will be the first one on mainland Canada. As part of the plan, our heritage church building will be revitalized, and the potential to support multiple uses for the conservation area, including green burial activities. I'm just going to share with you a few nice slides. This is the view across our existing cemetery, which I mentioned is actually full, has been full for a few years across the bay. This was one of the rare non-sunny days. And there's our lovely pink heritage church. It's our mother church of the parish. And we're very proud of it. And we even now have, as Marianne knows, an eco-loo. We have a composting toilet installed. So for the first time in 163 years, St Paul's has a working toilet. And as you see, we are a vibrant parish. So I'm going to hand it back to Louisa now to talk a bit more about these plans and conclude our presentation.
Thank you, Ray. Yeah, we've talked about this extensively over the last couple of years as it relates to how do parishes and congregations